We are looking for the best deal for Canada. We are only going to accept the best deal for Canada. That is very much informed. At a time when pressure from Washington is rising by the hour, Canada's response has been anything but rushed. Speaking at the First Minister's meeting in Huntsville, Prime Minister Mark Carney laid down a simple but resolute message. Canada will not sign just any deal. It will only accept the best deal. There's no panic, no scramble toward the August 1st deadline that President Trump imposed. Behind closed doors, Canadian ministers and senior advisors continue talks in Washington. But Carney made it clear if the deal on the table doesn't meet Canada's long-term economic interests, there will be no signature. This is not hesitation, it's strategy. Because when the rules keep changing and when the other side can shift the goalposts at any moment, signing quickly is not a win, it's a trap. So I understand that a bad deal for Canada would be worse than some of the other options, like putting up with more uncertainty for a few more months are taking us later into this year. Trump's tariff threats, once seen as a power move, are starting to backfire. The promise of punitive duties, 25% on steel, up to 35% on other Canadian goods, was meant to force a concession. But instead of dividing Canada, it's uniting it. Across the country, provincial premiers are standing shoulder to shoulder. From Ontario to Alberta to Manitoba, the message is consistent. Canada will not be bullied, and it won't pay any price for predictability. Even provinces hit hardest by tariffs, those relying on auto, steel, or lumber exports, have refused to fold. They're now backing
efforts to support domestic industries, invest in local production, and prepare matching tariffs if needed. As Premier Doug Ford put it, weakness won't be respected, only strength will. Our phone is ringing off the hook from other countries who want to do more with Canada. I've had over 80 bilaterals with world leaders since I became Prime Minister. While the US threatens, the rest of the world is calling. Carney revealed that since taking office, he has held over 80 bilateral meetings with global leaders, and many of them are now actively seeking deeper trade ties with Canada. This shift isn't theoretical, it's already happening. Premiers have launched trade missions across Europe and Asia. Canada is advancing talks with Mercosur, India, and even reviving dialogue with South Korea and China. But just as importantly, Canada is building presence from within. A wave of new trade agreements spurred by Ontario, Alberta, and Nova Scotia has laid the groundwork for a more unified national economy. The One Canadian Economy Act, passed just weeks ago, removes federal-level barriers that slowed internal commerce. The idea is simple: country less dependent on only one foreign partner can negotiate with more leverage and more confidence. This isn't just about who Canada it's about how Canada stands on its own. From steel to aluminum to rebar and I-beams, provinces like Ontario and Manitoba are investing in domestic production capacity. Factories that once relied on US imports are now pivoting toward local supply chains. And on the policy front, every major project, whether it's pipelines, energy infrastructure, or manufacturing, must be built with consensus, not coercion. Manitoba, for example, has delayed signing a west-to-east pipeline agreement until it secures full support from Indigenous communities. The results may take longer, but it will last longer too. These decisions aren't made
in fear of tariffs. They're made with an eye toward the future. A country where resilience, not reliance, defines its economic path. I think we should maybe just let go of the August 1st deadline as a fixation. And the fixation that we should have is the good deal, right? The long-term best interest of Canada. In many ways, Trump's strategy has produced the opposite of what he expected. His tariffs were supposed to isolate Canada. Instead, they've triggered something few saw coming. A nationwide effort to rewire the economy, reinforce internal unity, and expand global relationships. Canada is no longer waiting for a lifeline from Washington. It's building its own bridge. One that stretches from Asia to Europe, from Ottawa to Alberta, from local factories to global forums. And whether a deal with the US comes next week, next month, or not at all, one thing is clear. Canada is negotiating not from a position of weakness, but from a place of strength it's never fully tapped into until now. Canada is not open to us. They need to open their market. Unless they're willing to open their market, they're going to pay a tariff of Canada's economy. Of course, the federal government is getting down to the wire in trade negotiations with the US. Our software may actually be one of those opportunities for us to strike an early deal with the American. Trade talks between Canada and the United States have entered their most critical stage yet. With President Trump's August 1st deadline fast approaching, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick made it clear unless Canada opens its market, tariffs will hit. But Ottawa isn't folding. Prime Minister Mark Carney is now meeting with U.S. senators and provincial premiers to find a narrow path forward. A full rollback of tariffs is no longer expected. Instead, Canada is pushing for a limited sector-based deal, one that avoids broad economic damage and restores predictability, even if some tariffs remain. They want to ensure that they're able to provide high-quality, low-cost building materials for Americans. Also, it's a recognition that in this reality that we're in with this president, we got to put some things on the table to have conversations. In the midst of this, one old issue is taking on new significance. Softwood lumber. British Columbia has faced U.S. duties on softwood for years. But now, for the first time, Canadian officials, including Premier David Icke, are publicly signaling openness to export quotas as part of a deal. This marks a shift. Quotas were previously off the table. But with over $7 billion in softwood tariffs currently held in escrow and trade talks hanging by a thread, Canadian lumber is being positioned as a strategic bargaining chip, not just a casualty of U.S. protectionism. Why now? Because softwood could offer a rare quick win. It's a sector with high visibility, cross-border interdependence, and enough political weight on both sides to create leverage without touching more sensitive industries like dairy or autos. Look, we got to be honest with ourselves as Canadians, and I think the Carney government has done a good job at this in its sort of early days. This is Trump's strategy, right? Exactly what you just described. That's what his sort of mo has been really in Trump 2.0 administration. But the game Canada is playing is anything but straightforward. Trump's trade strategy has been deliberately chaotic. Shifting deadlines, unclear demands, and threats of full renegotiation of USMCA in 2026.
His pattern of destabilization forces either governments to react, not plan. Former New Brunswick Premier Brian Gollant, who once sat at the Premier's table, described Trump's approach as engineered confusion. And Canada this time is refusing to be baited. Carney's government isn't matching chaos with chows, it's choosing discipline, listening to provinces, aligning federal priorities and pursuing options outside its North American orbit. Canada's response is quiet but coordinated. Ontario defends its auto sector. British Columbia brings softwood to the table. Quebec wants time-bound clarity, despite differences presenting a united front. At the national level, Canada is reinforcing its foundation. Bill C-5 aims to break internal trade barriers. The major projects bill prioritizes infrastructure, energy,
and mining, especially with Indigenous partnership. Externally, Canada is expanding its reach from stronger ties with Mexico and the EU to renewed talks with G7 allies. The message is clear. Canada won't rely solely on Washington. Trump may still push forward with tariffs, but the cost is starting to show, not just for Canada, but for the US as well. Softwood lumber duties have already raised construction costs across the US, particularly in housing markets dependent on Canadian imports. American lawmakers are under pressure. A bipartisan delegation of senators is now in Ottawa, not to threaten, but to preserve economic stability. And the longer the standoff continues, the more Canadian industries accelerate their pivot away from US dependency. That's the paradox. The harder Trump pushes, the more self-reliant and strategic Canada becomes. This isn't just a trade dispute. It's a stress test for policy, diplomacy, and national cohesion. Softwood lumber might not look like much, but in this moment, it represents something bigger. The ability of a country to hold its ground, make smart concessions, and defend its sovereignty without shouting. Trump's tariffs may yet land, but if they do, the blowback won't just be felt in Ottawa. It'll echo across American construction sites, congressional offices, and investor portfolios. And in the end, it may be Canada's quiet resolve, not Washington's volume, that shapes the deal. US President Donald Trump showing no signs of backing down from his tariff agenda as old complaints about Canada surface again, adding to the already tense relationship. Still, the Trump administration insists this is not the end of free trade with its neighbors. When US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said that free trade with Canada is still possible, many were surprised. After months of tariff threats, some reaching 35%, the tone suddenly seemed less absolute. But the question isn't whether Trump changed his mind. It's why something clearly shifted behind closed doors. Because even as Trump keeps the pressure high, Ottawa may be holding a card that Washington can't afford to lose. That card: Canada's role in energy, and more specifically uranium. Largest uranium line comes out of Saskatchewan, comes over to Ontario and then gets enriched down in the US. Amazon, Google, Meta, and Microsoft are all betting on nuclear energy to power their AI data center. From California to Virginia, tech giants like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft are expanding massive data centers. And all of them have one thing in common. They demand enormous amounts of electricity, clean, constant, and carbon free. Nuclear power, once overlooked, is now back in the spotlight. And uranium, its essential fuel, is in short supply. The US has tried to revive domestic uranium production. In 2024, the US mined only 676,939 according to the US Energy Information Administration. That's less than 1.5% of the roughly £48 million America currently needs each year. And the gap is only growing. Trump's own executive orders target £190 million per year by 2050 as nuclear power quadruples to meet energy demand. But there's a problem. America now imports over 95% of its uranium. And the infrastructure for enrichment and processing is still dominated by Russia and China, two geopolitical rivals.
That's why Canada's uranium supply Ivanhoe, the Cigar Lake mine in Saskatchewan, operated by Cameco, produces 11% of global uranium demand, and a significant though undisclosed portion heads directly into the US nuclear fuel cycle. If Canada brings leverage to the negotiating table, it could change everything, and uranium is just the beginning. Because beyond nuclear fuel, Canada also powers America through oil, gas, and electricity. Resources equally hard to replace. Canada isn't just waiting for Trump's phone call. It's already shifting its energy exports away from the US. In July 2025, Canada shipped its first liquefied natural gas (LNG) cargo to South Korea from the massive LNG Canada terminal in British Columbia. With more LNG projects under development like Cedar LNG and Woodfibre LNG, Canada is building new energy corridors to Asia. Meanwhile, uranium exports to the European Union are surging. France's EDF signed long-term contracts for Canadian uranium to help reduce EU dependence on Russian energy. And in this broader strategy, Trump's tariffs have ironically slashed Canada's diversification. By turning to Asia and Europe, Ottawa
has reduced its reliance on American buyers and increased its leverage in return. Of course, the US has other energy suppliers. Australia, for example, ships uranium to American utilities, but even that relationship is under strain. Trade tensions, especially over pharmaceutical pricing and rare earths, have begun to affect broader economic ties. Other past suppliers like Russia and Belarus are either sanctioned or politically untenable. What's left is a short list, and Canada is at the top not just for uranium, but also for nickel, aluminum, auto parts and crude oil. Ontario alone holds the world's most accessible reserves of high-grade nickel, which is critical for electric vehicles, defense systems and AI servers. With supply chains so closely tied, the message is hard to miss. The two economies are simply too integrated to pull apart. Donald Trump has announced that he wants the golden age for the American economy. That means they're going to need more energy, more minerals, more steel and aluminum, more lumber, more concrete, more of the things that Canada is already sending them. Uranium and energy more broadly isn't just a Canadian export. It's leverage. In a negotiation driven by tariffs and tension, it might be the key to securing a deal with Trump. That's why, despite all the pressure and posturing, a partial deal before August 1st remains on the table. Canada may agree to some targeted tariffs on autos or steel, but only if its core energy exports remain protected. Because in the end, this isn't just a trade fight. It's a test of how two deeply linked economies find balance in an era of brinkmanship.